Good afternoon, everybody. Warm welcome to you all, and to those who, I'm sure there will be people who will carry on joining as we go along. But for those who have already joined, a very warm welcome from the Africa-Leds Partnership, and in particular, the African AFOLU Community of Practice. This is our first webinar of 2020, and we're quite excited to welcome you all. And today we'll be talking about the formulation of long-term climate resilient development strategies in the field of agriculture. And we are very excited to have a wonderful panel of experts. We have an hour for this webinar, and just to go through a couple of quick housekeeping issues. We have an hour, so we have quite a limited amount of time, but we are hoping that towards the end, after we've listened to our speakers, we will have some time for Q&A. You will notice at the bottom of your screen, you've got several icons and buttons. There is one specifically for the Q&A, and we will ask that any questions that you might ask in the course of the webinar, that you will click on the Q&A button and type in your question there. We would like to use the chat facility just to point out a couple of things, but please do not put any of your questions there. We would rather you put them in the Q&A section. That way we are able to, we as the panelists are able to look at them and respond to them. And if they are not responded to within the period of time we have for the Q&A, then we will definitely be able to respond to those, and we will communicate all of the responses once the panelists have weighed in. All of that will be communicated to you as part of the post-webinar. So please rest assured that even if your questions are not gotten to or answered in the space of this hour, that they will be attended to and the answers will be communicated to all of you. Now, I would like to dive in at this point and get things started. Just a quick rundown through the agenda. As I said, my name is Josh Ogada, and my role here is a very small one. It's just to welcome everybody and to go through a quick list of proceedings. I will then hand over to Dr. George Wamukoya, who will do the introduction of the panelists and to set the scene and give some context to the topic. And then, of course, we have presentations from a wonderful panel from Ghana, Kenya, Uganda, and Zambia. And as I mentioned, we will have time at the end for question and answers. Just a very quick introduction for those of you who might be new to the Africa-Leds Partnership and the AFOLU Community of Practice. We were launched in April of 2018 as an interactive network of African institutions and governments looking at addressing technical and policy changes and seeking solutions in the AFOLU sector. We aim as a community of practice and a regional platform to provide space for peer-to-peer exchange and collaboration in the sector, to provide demand-driven technical assistance and training in the LEDs and in this particular case, the AFOLU sector. We also look to share best practices, tools, resources, and case studies. And one of the things that we like to do with our webinars, it's a wonderful way for us to network, but also to share knowledge among experts within the continent. We also seek to foster champion institutions to carry out the work of the community of practice, and in this particular area, to carry out the work in the AFOLU sector. What we have set as priorities over the last couple of years is to look at agroforestry as a sector and look at action in that sector as a driver to socioeconomic development and the reduction of emissions. We also look at linking agricultural production with sustainable energy sources. We also take time to discuss and assess analytical approaches to GHG emissions and socioeconomic impacts of LEDs actions. More specific to, and in line with this particular webinar, we also focus on long-term planning and decarbonization of the land use sector. And of course, all of this works towards translation of analytical results to concrete policies and actions in the sector. Just a very, very quick plug in terms of our climate help desk, which is run by the NED's Global Partnership in conjunction with the regional partnerships, and in this case, the Africa-LED's partnership. This is a way in which we're able to offer ad hoc support for NDCs, long-term strategies, LEDs, and transparency systems that we might be working on in our regions and in our countries. And it's a global advisory network that provides rapid, high-quality, short-term assistance to developing countries and institutions within these countries. The Climate Help Desk is a joint service by LEDS GP and the Partnership on Transparency in the Paris Agreement, or PATPA. And this is done in collaboration with the NDC partnership. And in terms of who can access this help desk, obviously government actors and representatives, both at the national and the local levels, as well as technical institutions, consultants, and anybody else working directly with governments if they're endorsed by UNFCCC National Focal Point or the National Ministry of Environment. There are details down there in terms of how to access the help desk through climate.helpdesk@giz.de, or you can also visit the LEDS GP, LEDS Global Partnership website. Under the Assistance tab, you should be able to find the details of the Climate Help Desk. And we are also able to connect with the desk through the different working groups and through the communities of practice, such as this, the AFOLU Community of Practice. So, without further ado, at this point, I would like to hand over to Dr. George Wamukoya to introduce and to take us into this webinar. Over to you, George.
Yeah, thank you very much, Josh, for the introduction of the Africa LP, and I think it's very exciting that we have cooperation between the LEDS team and the group of negotiators and experts. As you told, my name is George Wamukoya. I am the co-chair of the Africa LP and also the team leader of the African group of negotiators expert support. And with me, I have colleagues who are from respective ministries of agriculture, from Ghana, Kingsley Amoako, from Kenya, Veronica and from Uganda, Stephen Muaya, and from Zambia, Morton Mwanza. All of them, besides being practitioners, they are also negotiators as part of the African group of negotiators. So I'll set the scene by moving to why long-term strategy and the relationship with NDCs. First, as those of you who are in the negotiations, the term NDC first appeared in 2013 in Warsaw in COP19, but concretized in 2014 at COP20, where the decision 1 CP20 paragraph 9 to 16, the Lima call for action, climate action on NDCs made very clear that the NDCs countries need to submit their pledges as to what they are likely to contribute as part of the global response. And if you recall, we had just the IPCC had just published the 5th assessment report, which provided evidence that the trajectory that we are on may not be appropriate, and therefore countries needed to increase their ambition. In 2015, which was very, very important. So what was important in that decision was that the countries must submit their pledges during the early part of 2015 so that an assessment could be done, which assessment would inform the discussions of the Paris Agreement. In 2015, a key milestone was the adoption of the Paris Agreement. And if you recall, the Paris Agreement, particularly Article 2, talks about a low emission and climate resilient development strategy. Very important. And especially Article 2, 1C,
Hello, George. I think we may have lost you there. Hello, George. If you can hear us, we've lost sound. Please check on your end. Do excuse us for a minute while we try and sort this out. Hello, George, can you hear us?
Hello?
Could I ask that anybody else attending from the AGNES office maybe assist and see if we can get George back on? I do apologize to everybody for this. We're going to try and resolve this as soon as possible.
Hello? No, not yet.
Yes, we're just trying to reach George. Kingsley, if you can hear me, I'm wondering if you want to go ahead and take over in the meantime, and we can come back to George's presentation.
Okay. George, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Kingsley. Please go ahead and share your screen. We will come back to George once we've sorted out the technical issues.
Okay.
So please just share your screen. There we go.
Okay. Ooh. Has my screen pop up, please?
Yeah.
Yes.
The screen is on. Go ahead, Kingsley.
Yes. Yes. I wonder whether George, because of the challenge we have with George, I need to introduce myself. My name is Kingsley Amoako. As you can see on the screen, the Deputy Director and the Head of the Environment and Climate Change Unit of the Ministry of Food and Agriculture. Yeah, I want to share with you Ghana's approach to aligning the long-term strategies and the NDCs. Ghana has indicated to update its NDCs that was submitted in 2015, with the objective of raising the ambitions for a robust adaptation action.
Kingsley, we can't hear you.
You can't hear me. La, 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 la. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you, Kingsley. Please go ahead.
Okay. Okay, so the objective of the NDC review, as I was saying, is one, to enhance our robust adaptation actions and also to raise mitigation ambitions. And as we know, in Ghana's NDC, agriculture is a very important sector, focusing mainly on adaptation as we have submitted. But we have also come to accept the fact that agriculture potentially can contribute to mitigation because of its serious activities that also contribute to mitigation, right from soil level to tree growing and plantation development and those other things. So to inform the review of the agriculture components of Ghana's NDCs, the Ministry of Food and Agriculture is developing agriculture long-term strategy that will inform the development pathways in the changing climatic conditions, so that up to, let's say, 2050, we will have the pathway to drive agricultural development of the country. And here I want to emphasize that the development of the long-term agriculture strategy is being undertaken by national experts with support from partners, including AGNES, AFOLU, COP, and others. And the process has already started. And the strategy is that when this long-term agriculture strategy is developed, then it can give guidance to which areas to focus in the review or update of agriculture components of the NDCs, so that it can also feed into the overall development of or review and update of Ghana's NDCs. As we speak, Ghana has set in motion the process to review the NDC starting this May, and we have up to October to deliver the updated NDCs, unless the postponement of the COP to next year will also affect the submission of the updated NDCs to the UNFCCC. So for now, we are still working within that calendar. And the long-term strategy is going to inform the review of the agriculture component of the NDCs. The strategy is looking at three or four steps by looking at the analysis of the current status, impact of climate change on agriculture, the adaptation measures that have been implemented so far. We're also looking at policy environments that support climate change adaptation and mitigation in the agriculture sector, and then the scenario development to inform the long-term strategy. And then once that is done, then we'll plug that one into identifying which areas of the NDCs needs to be updated. Currently, Ghana's NDC agriculture component focuses more on adaptation than mitigation, but through the long-term strategy, we expect that mitigation actions will also be identified, and then we can use that one to update the agriculture component to enable us also contribute to the mitigation element of the NDCs. And then the strategy or the thinking is that once this NDC is reviewed and we have the long-term strategy in place, we are going to use the NDC as a tool to implement the long-term strategy. And then every 5 years, as has been provided in the Paris Agreement, we'll review the implementation of the agriculture component or the NDCs as a whole, and then try to adjust where necessary going forward. So in short, this is the approach that Ghana has adopted. And of course, we are trying as much as possible to also align the long-term strategies and then the NDCs with the national development planning, so that these documents speak to each other, and then we don't have to get separate documentation, separate reporting, and separate actions. So one action should be able to report on all these 2 or 3 documents, so that going forward, we're trying to integrate NDCs into agricultural development planning and implementation actions. Let me end here and say that we are grateful to have the opportunity to participate in this webinar, and we are standing by for further engagement should there be questions that we can take up. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Kingsley. So next is Kenya, and I request all the other colleagues who are coming to speak, make sure you speak in 5 minutes, because we want more room for colleagues to interact with us. Veronica.
Veronica,
Hello?
are you able to share your slide?
Yes, I'm requesting George to share for me the slides. The slide. Are you able to do it, George, please? Hello?
Veronica, please go ahead in the meantime while George figures out sharing a slide if he's able to. Please go ahead.
Oh, okay, fine. Thank you. My name is Veronica Detu. I work for the Ministry of Agriculture in Kenya. I coordinate the climate change unit in the ministry. And so all issues to do with climate change and issues to do with the NDC in the agriculture sector.
Veronica, are you able
Yes.
to proceed?
Yes. Hello?
Yes, please go ahead, Veronica. And George, if you're able to share the slides on behalf of Veronica, please do so. But please go ahead, Veronica.
Fine. So I am saying that in agriculture sector, we are planning to do the updating of the NDC. And because this process is being spearheaded by the Minister of Environment, we have decided that as agriculture, we need the long-term strategy for updating, so that we need to do a situational analysis where we are going to establish the status of the agriculture sector as it is, and implementation of adaptation and mitigation issues. So that then we want to do a situational analysis to look at our policies and see whether they are going to deliver a low carbon agriculture development. So this process we have started, and we intend to take stock of the results of the implementation of the first or the current NDC. We want to map out the adaptation and the mitigation options that will be there based on the situational analysis that we'll have done. We also want to identify the focus for enhanced action. That is, if we need to enhance our ambition for implementing adaptation and mitigation benefits in our NDC, then it has to be informed by an analysis that has been done to make sure that it is feasible, so that we don't just put figures in the NDC that are not going to be helpful. So this process is also going to do a scenario development, where we are going to look at the modeling of immediate and future impacts of climate change on the subsectors. That is the crops subsector, the livestock subsector, and the fisheries. As you know, in Kenya, livestock is deemed to be the one that is producing much more greenhouse gas emissions. So we need to do all this to ensure that we actually are informed by some information. Then we are looking at our policies, and we look at, are they, the agriculture policies that we have, are they going to be able to be tailored to ensure that they are delivering on low carbon development pathway. So this is what we are planning in Kenya. We have been supported by development partners who include the AGNES, that is the African Group of Negotiators. We have the FAO and we have ACTS. So we are very glad to be able to do our updating of the NDC. We believe that our next NDC is going to be much more informed by evidence after having done this process. Because then when we have done our situational analysis, we are going to be sure that we know where the gaps are, we know where the challenges are in implementing the current NDC, and then we look at what are the opportunities and what are the incentives that we have for the implementation of our updated NDC. So once we do that, and we do the modeling and we see how our crops, is our livestock going to be in the future climate scenarios, then we know that this is what we need to do in order to be able to initiate adaptation and mitigation initiatives so that then we could be implementing our NDC. When we have done all that, then we are going to have an updated agriculture NDC that is going to be fed onto the national NDC. And we believe that our next NDC, our updated NDC is going to be much more active. It is going to be much more informed by decisions. I think that is what I would want to share from Kenya, and we are happy that we have had supporters, people that have, organizations that have supported us to do the work that we are doing. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Veronica, and apologies for. So we move to Uganda, Stephen Moya.
Okay. Are you able to? Oh my God. Okay.
We can hear you, Stephen.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I thought you are not seeing my screen. Just a minute.
Share your screen if you can, please.
Okay. Okay, my screen. Thank you. So, am I visible? Am I audible? Hello.
You are audible, Stephen.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Stephen Moya from Uganda. We work with the Ministry of Agriculture, Animal Industry and Fisheries. I just wanted to briefly give the Ugandan context with respect to NDCs. And here I want to emphasize that Uganda agriculture is very critical for national development, contributing about 27% of the national GDP, 80% of total exports, and of course also employs about 72% of the workforce. I want also to emphasize that agriculture is the most vulnerable sector to climate change in Uganda. With a low input, external input use agriculture. And of course, this is obviously a problem with leading to low crop yields. And this is also very important to emphasize that agriculture in Uganda contributes almost 50% of GHG emissions, largely associated with livestock, as my colleague from Kenya also emphasized. And therefore, agriculture is a priority sector for GHG emissions, as well as adaptation, which are very important for our particular concern. I want also to say that Uganda did submit its first NDC in 2015, and the target was to reduce GHG emissions by 22% by 2030. And I must say that we've done what we can, but we believe that we need more evidence, we need more information, hence the need for this process. Uganda is due to review its NDC by 2020. And I must say that the Ministry of Agriculture, Animal Industry and Fisheries, being supported by FAO and the AGNES, are really helping us in developing the long-term carbon low carbon climate resilience agriculture development strategies. This is really important that we need this in order to inform our agriculture component of the revised NDC, which is coming. I must also say that, of course, we are following the Paris Agreement. We are referring to Article 4, paragraph 19, which requires countries to prepare mid-century long-term low-emission climate resilient development strategies by 2020. And here, what are our expectations with respect to the long-term low-emission climate strategy? Here, we believe that this should help us to have a clear visionary agenda, which helps us to identify those bold and concrete actions, which will go into a long-term investments that will help us to deliver sustainable economic transformation within our country. And I must say this, that Uganda, but also the rest of Africa, we believe that these processes should help us appreciate a transformation that can help us to feed our populations, especially our largely youthful population in this part of the world. And also we must be able to use agriculture as a stepping stone to achieve the sustainable development goals and even beyond that. And we believe that Africa has a capacity to support sustainable diets because of our biofoods. And we believe very much that we must align food to human health. We must also be able to align food to our health planet, because they all relate to each other depending on the system that we shall use. The limitation of warming to 1.5 to 2 degrees is a part of this process that we must aspire. The process we are looking at, working with those agencies, is to work with the national experts, with the Ministry of Agriculture, Climate Change Committee and Climate Task Force, to work with also with the ministry responsible for climate change, to come up with this long-term low-emission strategic climate resilient development strategy. Under this arrangement, we are already undertaking what we call a situation analysis study for the agriculture sector. We are aiming at really identifying the baseline for climate change impacts, vulnerability, and greenhouse emissions. We are also then looking at doing the long-term low-emission climate resilience development pathways. And here we are looking at climate change and development modeling. We are looking at trying to find the future development scenarios. We are also looking at future projections and also how we can actually determine adaptation and mitigation options. And then we should then be able to make clear recommendations on the long-term low carbon climate resilience agriculture development pathways under the different scenario. We intend to use this important document to really align and revise our NDCs, and also to align this to the Uganda National Development Program number 3, which is already due in the nearest future. Thank you very much for your attention. This is all I have to say from Uganda. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stephen. So next is Morton from Zambia.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Let me just try to join here. Hello.
Yes,
Hello,
please go ahead, Morton.
My slide?
We can see your slide. Please put it in full presenter mode.
Okay.
Carry on.
Okay.
Perfect. Thank you. Go ahead.
Am I audible enough?
Yes, you are. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Morton. I work for the Ministry of Agriculture in Zambia as a Principal Agriculture Officer, and at the same time, I'm focal point person for climate smart agriculture in the department. I'll give a brief presentation on our works here in Zambia, especially in line with the developing the long-term strategy for Zambia's agriculture sector. Yeah. Zambia is revealing the NDCs, which we submitted to the UNFCCC in 2015, just like the other presenters have already stated. And the objective basically was to try and raise the mitigation ambitions. And when you look at the slide, which is showing there, it is indicating the top 3 GHG emitting sectors in the country, and agriculture is one of them, which shows that actually we need to find some ways of trying to reduce the emissions from the agriculture sector. Agriculture being an important economic sector in Zambia, and it's prioritized by the government as economic growth, and just like other key development objectives and critical priorities. At the same time, as we are also looking at the economic growth and the key development objectives and critical priorities, we're also trying to respond to the climate change challenges which are also affecting the agriculture sector. And we are pleased that through the support by a number of cooperating partners through AGNES, we have been supported to be able to undertake this work, to try and work on the LOTAs and how to see how they'll contribute to the Zambia's NDCs revision process. When we look at the 2 areas where we are looking at economic growth and also the key development objectives, which are being prioritized by the countries, and also at the same time, the country is also trying to respond to the climate change challenges. We are coming to a point where we're looking at the long-term climate resilience development pathway, such strategies for agriculture, which we feel will try to look at the 2 areas, economic growth and response to the climate change challenges. And as such, through the development of these long-term strategies for agriculture, this will somehow try to help us to enhance the synergies between agriculture development objectives and the climate action. So we'll try to see the synergies which exist between the 2 as we try to address the economic growth through the agriculture sector and also the climate change challenges which are being faced. We'll try to enhance the synergies. And in the process, again, we'll try to enrich the agriculture component of the NDCs. And the successive NDCs will also aid us to implement the LOTAs. So in brief, we would say that the LOTAs will try to find the most appropriate pathways, low carbon pathways, which will help us to reduce the emissions in the agriculture sector. And at the same time, those low carbon pathways will also try to also promote the economic growth of the sector. So we will try to strike an appropriate pathway which will guarantee us some reduction in the emissions, and at the same time promote economic growth in the agriculture sector. So we are so pleased that this opportunity has been given to us as a country to try and develop these long-term strategies. And it would help us also to ultimately feed into the nationally determined contribution for Zambia, which has already been, which has started to be revised under the Ministry of Natural Resources. And as such, we hope by the end of the exercise, we'll be able to have the NDCs, which will help us to reduce the emissions under the agriculture sector, and at the same time promote economic growth. So that's what we are working as a country, and I would like once again to thank the support we have received so far. We have already started the situation analysis in the agriculture sector, and we'll be doing the scenarios development, which will lead ultimately at the end to feed into the NDCs. Once again, I would like to thank the organization which have provided the support through AGNES to have us undertake this very important assignment. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Morton and colleagues. At least what is important to underscore is that
George, are you there? We've lost your sound again. While we are sorting that out, could I ask that I can see that there are quite a number of questions that have been asked by the participants. We've got about 21 questions for the various panelists. Could I ask that in the meantime we start looking at those questions and preparing answers for those? There are quite a few of them, and we're hoping that we will be able to get George back, but in the meantime, we can start thinking about the questions that have been asked. So I will direct the panelists to look at the Q&A section. There got questions there for quite a few of them for Ghana. There are quite a few for Veronica in Kenya, and yeah, quite a few of them. So please start thinking of how we can go about responding to those. George, are you able to hear us? George, do we have you back? We don't seem to have George back.
Are you able to hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now, George.
Oh, okay, good. Yeah. So I think you've already given good guidance. So Ghana, I think there's some questions which have been asked. If you can run quickly without too much, maybe so that we can give more or each an opportunity to finalize.
Thank you very much. I can see one question from Charles, who is asking how are the local levels involved in the NDC implementation. For the agriculture sector, as soon as the document was completed, together with our National Climate Smart Agriculture and Food Security Action Plan, we have embarked on sensitization of all the district department of agriculture, which form the district local government setup, so that they can also roll out activities in response to what is contained in the NDC. So once we have that sensitization done, it is integrated in their agricultural activities and actions on the ground. So that is how it is done. I also saw another question from a colleague from Côte d'Ivoire asking about, yes, how agriculture is able to interact with other ministries to complete the NDCs and then achieve its objectives. For Ghana, we have a working group that work on the NDCs, and it is composed of experts from all sectors that are captured in the NDCs. So each of the sector leads lead the compilation and the development of the sector NDCs, and it is put together under the coordination of the Ministry of Environment and Environmental Protection Agency. So that is how it is done. It's a compilation of sectoral NDCs that make up the national NDCs. I think I've so far 2 questions and.
Okay, good. Thanks, Kingsley. Veronica, there is a question about how are you going to validate the outcome of this exercise, and what's the level of documentation available at the moment for updating the NDC? I think that you already explained,
Please go ahead. Please go ahead, Veronica, with the questions that that have been answered so far.
Thank you. I can see the first question is, how is the LTS strategy for agriculture in Kenya linking to sustainable energy? And what I would like to say that is that this will be an agriculture LTS, but of course, energy cuts across. There's a lot of use of energy in agriculture. So all the activities that have to do with agriculture and all the issues that have to do with agriculture will be taken care of in this LTS, so that it's not going to hang on just agriculture alone, but it's going to take care of the supporting sector issues. So we look at the issues of in the agriculture documents or policy documents, where there is use of energy, where we are advocating for manufacturing, we are advocating for land preparation, we are advocating for a lot of energy use within the system. Then of course the efficient use of energy and use of renewable energy, where applicable, are going to be considered. So the LTS is going to take care of that. The other one is the validation. How do you, at what scale do you validate? We are going to subject the consultancy work to stakeholder validation through the national level, and also at the county level involvement, and also not just at the government level, but also involvement of all stakeholders, including the NGOs, the private sector, the academia, and the research. So everybody is going to be at all levels is going to be involved in validating the work. The other question is, what is the level of documentation available at the moment for updating the NDC? I want to believe that there may be not information put together currently, but there is a lot of information scattered in different areas with projects in agriculture, with different stakeholders in agriculture. And we have talked to our consultants, and they are going to consult with everybody that is involved in implementation of agriculture. And I think we are going to have to get a lot of information from that. There may be no documentation put together in government, but there is plenty of information with the different stakeholders. So I think that there is plenty of documentation, and it's going to be collected from different stakeholders, and then all of it will be put together. Yeah, I think the other one is not a question. It's that somebody is confirming that in Nigeria, livestock is the main emitter of greenhouse gas emissions, and that is true for Kenya. I think that is being confirmed. The other, I think the one I would want to talk about is what is the place of adaptation in the LTS? And what I would want to say is that this is not just going to look at mitigation. When you look at our NDCs, we have adaptation, like the Kenyan NDC, we have the adaptation analysis report, and we also have the mitigation analysis report, where agriculture fits in each one of them. So I think this is going to be a combination of of both adaptation and mitigation ambitions. so that we are going to have a very big place. Because I think it remains that we still want to say that adaptation is our core business, and then mitigation becomes a core benefit. So that still retains adaptation as very, very key in the LTS. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Veronica. Before we move on to the others, just a general question that has come in from Professor Almeida Sito, who has been working quite closely with us in the AFOLU community of practice. He asks the question, how do you evaluate the challenge of balancing reducing carbon emissions and promoting development, in brackets, reducing poverty? So maybe that is something that you could touch on, Veronica, and then maybe Kingsley could also want to weigh in on that.
Thank you. I think I've just said, and I think that's a good question, that in Kenya, and I believe in Africa, is that adaptation is our key business. And mainly in agriculture, we have to think about food security as we talk about reducing carbon emissions. So what we are looking at is, as we adapt in agriculture, we also have to look at it that we are developing our agriculture in as low carbon pathway as possible. So there's a balance there. Our focus is really not reducing the emissions, but where possible, we have to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. Morton, I'm going to throw one to you that is probably a more general one to all the panelists that has been asked by Klaus. He asks which role in support of organic agriculture in the agricultural policies, what support is there in the different countries in terms of agricultural policies for organic agriculture? Maybe you could give the example of your country and the others can weigh in. Morton, can you hear us? If not, then maybe Stephen would like to weigh in the question on organic agriculture and the support that it receives in terms of agricultural policies.
Yes, I must say that, yes, in much of Africa, we are working on ensuring food security. And we know that most of the farming communities are smallholders, and they rely upon mostly natural systems with low external inputs. And most likely what they are producing is likely to be organic. On the other hand, we recognize that due to acute food insecurity in areas, we have to also promote alongside with that a situation where people have to use some of the inputs like fertilizers and pesticides and all that may not be deemed to be organic. And therefore our policy, really the most important policy at the country level is the balance between the two, looking out for the opportunities to take the niche for organic, and as well as ensuring food security for all by ensuring that there is enough production and productivity enhancement to supply food for everybody. So this is perhaps one way that would look at it. On the issue relating to the link between adaptation and mitigation, I think, as one said, for Africa, we are emphasizing mitigation, adaptation. And we know that there is a synergy between adaptation and mitigation, especially where we know that we are able to see some adaptation, mitigation action, providing benefits that increase productivity, that enhance efficiency in the use of nutrients, in the use of nutrients and water. And therefore, we believe strongly that we need to emphasize that. But also, as you can see, our long-term development pathway is focusing on both low carbon and ensuring that we have a very resilient process that ensures that communities have food, that ensure that there's economic development, And we believe that our national development plans should really be aligned to the long-term strategies because of the link between the two. And we believe that these strategies should really come out strongly within the LTS that we are developing. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Stephen. I don't know if, George, you're back online, but there's a question here from a gentleman who asks how the Coronavia discussions under the UNFCCC could support you and your work in the enhancement of NDCs with respect to agriculture. I think this is quite topical for you, George.
Yeah, are you able to hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Please go ahead.
Yeah, Coronavia is a very important instrument. For those who have been in the agriculture negotiations for a while know that initially Coronavia was only dealing with scientific technological discussions. Then we brought in implementation. And this year, hopefully, when we have COP26, we will be able to discuss what will be the next stage of Coronavia. And from the Africa perspective, the next emphasis is implementation, because now we have already demonstrated that we are able to harness the evidence, the science, which then can inform the policy and the implementation. So yes, the LTS will clearly use the evidence that has been generated partly from Coronavia and the IPCC reports, but also streamline concrete actions that could be implemented through the support of the available climate financing opportunities, particularly from GCF.
Thank you very much for that, George. Since we have you on a clear line, do you want to maybe tackle any of the other general comments? Or since I can see we've only got about 2 minutes to go to just wind up the discussion for us?
Yeah, quickly, one is that this notion that LTS is talking about mitigation, that's not true. I would invite colleagues to look at Article 2 of the Paris Agreement, and it deals with a low emissions climate resilient development strategy. And that's what this is all about. How do you link adaptation and mitigation and capitalize on the synergies thereof? Number two, when NDCs were done in 2015, at that time, countries did not know or were not expected to show where they were going. It's on that basis that it became necessary that we have a framework that allows countries to think. And that's why in both mitigation and adaptation, you need to develop where do you want to see your sector or your economy in 2050, in whatever, and then from there you use NDC as a tool to implement towards what you require or where you aspire to be. And I think that by so doing, then it means aligning the NDCs with the long-term strategy. It's more practical, it's more realistic, because you know where you are and you know where you want to go, and therefore you develop tools to help you, or actions to help you to get to where you want to go.
Thank you very much for that, George. And at this point, I realize that we are out of time, and I noticed that a couple of our participants are probably pressed and wanting to move on. We just want to say a very big thank you to all of our panelists, and more importantly, to all of you who took the time to join us for this webinar. We understand that we face a lot of challenges since everybody is working remotely and technology becomes problematic. But we would like to assure you that we will engage with all of the panelists, that all of the presentations are collected and they will be shared as part of the post-webinar comms in the next week or so. You will receive emails if you registered and you attended the webinar. You will receive an email that will have all of the documentation, including all of the presentations. But I think more importantly, the number of questions that were asked, some of which, both questions and comments, some of which we did not have time to respond to. We will also give our panelists a chance to apply their minds to these questions and provide answers, and the answers to these questions will also be provided as part of our post-webinar communication. So please rest assured that any issues that you might feel have been left hanging will be addressed and will be sent through to you. Thank you very much at this point, and we will, as the AfLP and the AFOLU community of practice, we will be communicating with you in terms of when, what the next steps are, when our next webinars, our next communication is. So please keep an eye on our Africa-Ned's partnership website and our partner websites to get any information and updates in terms of what we will be doing next. So thank you very much. And at this point, we would like to end the webinar and thank you all very much for attending. Goodbye.